think about today's movie, and I think to myself, of all the most expensive things you could do with this movie, the hair budget must have been excessive.
The hairspray budget.
Yeah, because this is a movie that was on and off production for 5 years, and I know something about long gestating film projects. This is a movie that took 5 years to make, and they kept having to bring the people back and make sure they look the same way and spray that hair with as much hairspray as possible, so that we could get a film like Eraserhead, what we're talking today. So join us for David Lynch
Debut.
Yeah. He delivered papers to make this movie.
Yeah,
David Lynch did. So join us as we break down the first film, a wildly divisive amongst film fans, I think, film.
Yeah.
Eraserhead. And welcome back to the show. I'm one of your hosts, Kyle Goethe from GoatFilmReviews.com.
I'm Nick from the St. Paul Filmcast. Thanks again for watching. Thanks again for finding us. And for our loyal fans, thank you to continue to support the show. Hey, we're on Twitter and on Instagram. You can follow us that way. We do have a Patreon. Check that out. Maybe you can find some more David Lynch movies we could critique. Today we're going to talk about a movie that turns 45 in March. David Lynch's debut movie. It's Eraserhead.
Yeah, so Henry Spencer, a factory worker, discovers that his girlfriend Mary is pregnant. When she gives birth to a deformed baby, Henry moves in with her and the child. Premature deformed baby.
Yeah.
Henry moves in with her and the child, but the baby's constant crying drives a wedge between Henry and Mary, turning their parental lives into an unholy nightmare.
Okay, I would say right now, it's one of the top 10 best midnight movie screenings you can go see. Obviously, people love to go see Rocky Horror Film Picture Show as a audience participation. But this is such a fit perfectly to go see at a midnight screening of, because I think that's the right time to go see this movie.
Well, and that's kind of where it got its footing. It didn't do particularly well in its initial release, but it just found itself being kind of not like. But the difference between Rocky Horror and this film is Rocky Horror was a participation.
That's what I meant.
Like you mentioned. Whereas Eraserhead is much more of like
you sit there and go, what in the?
It's a nightmare, whereas Rocky Horror is kind of a dream.
Right, and it's the famous quote is, "I don't like my nightmares, but I certainly like to watch other people's."
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah, I don't like my own, but I certainly like to watch other people's. And this is very, you have a lot of the staples of David Lynch would use in other films. You have very much the black humor. You have the awkward performances. Everybody's kind of awkward. Have the little spacing between them.
Yeah.
Very weird erotic imagery. And you need a lot of surrealism, and you have the neurotic, slow pacing, as well as David Lynch. Even though he likes to do visuals, I would say David Lynch likes to work more with sound than anything. And this is one of the things that sound plays heavy with this movie.
Yeah, it's got that underlying kind of current of static that plays throughout the whole movie.
Yeah, that white noise straight up.
It gives an unnerving feeling. It gives a tense-filled feeling.
Yeah, so sound, I would say, is part of the cast.
Yeah, and this is also a movie that, like we talked about at the beginning, is a 5-year gestating period where like they ran out of money and just sent everyone home. There was a crew of about, I can't remember how many people. It was like 5 or 6 people actually that would like work in. Oh yeah, crew of 6 that actually.
And Stacey Spacek was doing clapboard too.
She was doing work, yeah. Like so, people would show up and just kind of help make this movie, and that's kind of like, it makes me feel good to know that people just show up to help you make your movie, because it's not something that's easy to come by. Is a bunch of people that are willing to get together and
it is a nice feeling. We've been on a set where it's like a crew of like 10. My movie I directed, we only had 10 or 12, but it's wonderful when you got 10 people want to have the same goal and they have the same energy.
I've been on film sets before where we joked that like I was going to have every credit. Like that, I was going to be like in the lighting department. I was going to be in the sound department, in the music department. I was going to be in every spot. I even played the background of a couple of female characters when we weren't able to get the actresses in.
David likes to do everything but be on camera.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I mean, he has acted.
He has been on camera too. Yeah.
But it's interesting to note, especially when you think about certain things. I think, don't quote me 100%, but I believe there's a scene where Henry goes into that tunnel, and
the beginning of the movie.
Him going into the tunnel was shot at like the beginning of production, and him exiting the tunnel was the end of production. So a 5-year gap takes place where he goes into that void and
it's
comes
very
back
much
out.
a deep metaphor explaining David Lynch movies.
Yeah, and explaining kind of the lossless idea of the movie.
Yeah.
Not everything is explained in this movie, and in fact, he referred to it in an interview once as his most personal film. And when he was asked to elaborate, he said no.
No. what did you use as the puppet for the baby? And
Yeah.
he still won't say.
He still won't say.
He still won't say how they made it, right? Or maybe they found it, or maybe it's a fetus or something that they just use mechanically. He won't talk about it.
Yep.
But right, and somebody mentioned, I don't remember the critic. I wish I did, but the emphasis is David Lynch is somebody that almost like you take apart a drum to see how it works, but you see the inside of a drum and you don't really know. But you know, if you put it together and you work on it, it makes noise. And it's almost like David Lynch. If you take it apart, you see the mechanics, but you don't. Okay, that's great, but there's nothing really interesting. So there's really no mystery. It's like, okay, but you put it together and you get a product.
Yeah. I oftentimes refer to movies that I don't like that have a lot of great elements to it as it's kind of like, you know, a souffle with the best ingredients that doesn't turn out. This is kind of a reversal of that in that, like, there's a lot of things in this movie that if you just extract one element of it and just focus on one element, you'd think, how could this work in a movie?
Right.
But then you put them all together and you actually have something that works very, very well because all the elements are of a singular vision. And I think that comes with the idea of David Lynch he is a visionary filmmaker. I think he's one of the best singular vision filmmakers ever because you know a David Lynch film from so many elements, but people believe in it and they push to his vision.
Well, he's one of those that you can make very avant-garde films commercially successful.
Yeah.
That you can trust your audience as a broad stroke to appreciate the movie. As well as this movie was a barometer test for cult filmmaking. If you had a Eraserhead poster, it'd be like, you could go, hey dude, yeah. And so it's almost like, if you see in this movie, which is a surprise, I'd never seen this movie until we critiqued it, which is interesting. But I've seen snippets of it. You know what you're getting into before you start the movie.
Yep.
But it was always like, if you had a Eraserhead poster, then you know the guy was,
So I actually got into this one
girl.
not through Lynch specifically, but because I'd been a fan of Twin Peaks at that point. But I'd seen the movie House Sue from 1977, which is a Asian horror film kind of set in a haunted house, and it's considered like a gonzo bonkers horror film because there's a talking piano that eats people and a sentient cat and everything like that. I watched this movie and I was like, man, this movie is crazy. I love it. And another colleague of mine was like, okay, so you're looking for that kind of movie. And then they said, go get Eraserhead. It was one of the more expensive blind buys I've ever had. I got the Criterion Edition, which is great because it comes with a bunch of short films and a ton of background feature stuff, which made me appreciate how this movie could even exist. Because everything was going against him. He couldn't get the funding he wanted. He had a 22-page script.
It's just one of those that's fascinating. It's sometimes fascinating to research how it got made, the making of this, and actually seeing the movie.
Yeah.
We've seen a lot of movies that's far more fascinating sometimes to how they got it made than it's almost very much Robert Rodriguez how he got it.
If you look at this movie compared to, I guess, one of his immediate follow-ups to it, The Elephant Man, because Mel Brooks watched Eraserhead
and he loved it.
Said, I need to get him to make a movie for me.
He loved it. Can you see Mel Brooks watching it and go, this is so weird, I don't get it, but I love it.
Yeah, they're like the most polar opposite people, but again, great artists appreciate interesting, unique voices. But if you look at this in comparison to The Elephant Man, I will always prefer when Lynch is going more dreamlike, more horror than he did when he went so straightforward with The Elephant Man. The Elephant Man's a great movie, but the parts I enjoyed the most were the opening 10 minutes.
Which has a weird, Elephant Man, we talked about it, has a weird, beginning orientations of maybe the woman and an elephant consummated. Yeah. Where you have this, almost like him and her consummated, but this alien came out.
Something else,
the cosmos, this guy up there in the cosmos, so very much like navigating the world, drops it down to the world and contaminates it for some reason. So there's almost very much this, he has this weird of how things get made. Also parenting is almost weird. Parenting's almost on an underlay through all these projects as well.
Yeah, if you ever want to not have kids, a good double feature is Eraserhead and The Brood. Because both of them will make you just go, nah, not for me. Because it's just horror films featuring children as the antithesis of all that is good. I really like, we talked about it before we started here, Jack Nance's portrayal as Henry. I like that Jack Nance was the kind of person who could play like incredibly down-to-earth people.
He does it with
incredibly out there people.
Does acting with his eyebrows.
Yeah, he's very eyebrow-driven.
But he's great at it. Yeah, yeah. But right, and I remember somebody when I was in college and younger telling me that the world, it's not so much the big events that you have problems with that you can deal with it. It's that slow little hammer on your balls all day. And this movie is a great example that it's not the big cataclysm events of all of a sudden you're surprised that your girlfriend gave a baby, but the constant, like, day-to-day operations. The crying, the noises. What the hell is a radiator now is going to make noises? And that kind of, all this. And then, you know, the girlfriend and all that stuff. So it's the little tedious events of constant, even though it's not overbearing noise, it's not quiet.
Yeah. I liken it to, I'm a cat owner. I've got 2 amazing cats. I love them so much.
Yeah.
But at 4 a.m. sometimes when you wake up and they're staring in your face and they just go, like that stuff is where I'm
As well as I've been dealing with chronic tinnitus in this whole winter, and to see this movie, it's like I had to take a time out because her meltdown is something I've had to deal with my chronic tinnitus.
You
as well.
paused the movie, went into your radiator and hugged Henry, and we're like, I get you, bro.
Yeah. The cosmos is always going to mess with you. That's how I perceive the guy at the window. So, right.
Yeah, and I like that this is a movie, I think, for all of the elements that are unexplained, that are dreamlike, there is a narrative here amidst all of it. It's a simple narrative, and that's why I said, it's a 22-page script turned into
we talked about, like,
movie.
Prom Night didn't have a lot of answers for us. It didn't really resolve. But here, I think we enjoy it, that there's not a lot of resolution, but it has a thread to it.
Is that Prom Night asks the questions because it wants the answers. This movie doesn't ask questions. It allows you to create your own, but it's never asking, like, the questions are not part of the narrative. The narrative's pretty simple. Guy gets with his girlfriend, she gets pregnant, the baby comes out, the baby is driving them crazy, and they go a little insane.
That's it.
That's the narrative, pretty much. This Prom Night is a movie that asks you to find the answers and then doesn't give you satisfying answers.
Yeah, it does it better explain it correctly. Yes, and it's very much understands its world. It's very industrial. It's very unclean. Mm-hmm. It's very, even though they're sophisticated, he wears a suit and tie. I know people dressed like that for Halloween. Sometimes dressed as Eraserhead and stuff like that. But it's not really dialogue heavy. I don't think Henry speaks a lot.
No, his is all very reactionary speaking, and it's more of a yes, no, thank you, ma'am kind of a
he's polite.
He's polite. He's also always in trouble. Every person he's hanging out with is mad at him for something that he's not really sure he did, and he's not a particularly good guy, but he is always in trouble.
Heroic.
Yeah,
but it's also that overbearing, that the world is constantly messing with you. Mm-hmm. Perception, like, if you just give me a break, I could go on with my world and just enjoy life, but I can't. Yeah.
Well, and we saw that through, Lynch's, like, marriage was crumbling at the time he was making this film. He too had a child, and his child constantly talks out about how, like, she thinks she inspired Eraserhead. He always said no, she didn't, but I'm sure there's something
we know not to trust David Lynch's answers.
Exactly, yeah. So I mean, there's a lot of things that I think that Henry is.
Well, he says this is his most personal film.
Yeah, and Henry is, very much David Lynch. He's got the hair. He's got the Lynch hair. It's very obviously David Lynch as Henry. And then we have Henry as, like, a character who is both terrified and fascinated by sex.
And David Lynch is very polite, and he has very respectful.
And he's drinking coffee, and he's doing all these Lynchian things. Yeah. Henry is probably the most Lynchian character of his entire filmography, because he is like that driving force of who David Lynch was.
Because, like, Kyle in Blue Velvet is almost like his iconic version of a man, like with Alfred Hitchcock, when it's like, I want to see, like, a epitome of a man, I was always like Cary Grant.
Yeah.
And then when David Lynch is like, I want to see an epitome of a man, I'll put Kyle in my movies.
Yes, Kyle MacLachlan appears, like, he is through the prism of David Lynch.
How the ideal, perfect, yeah.
That's how he was in Blue Velvet and Twin Peaks, like, even I guess even Paul Atreides in his Dune.
And then he wants, if you
use that.
David Lynch wants an everyday man, he'll hire Jack Nance. Where Alfred Hitchcock wants everyday man, he'll just put Jimmy Stewart.
Exactly, but yeah, we get who David Lynch views himself in some ways through the way he uses Jack Nance here. Yeah. The way he uses him in Twin Peaks too is he's the guy who comes across Laura Palmer. He's the normal guy who's going out fishing and then comes across a dead body. Like, he's very small town. Beloved, and that's the way Jack Nance always kind of pervaded through Lynch's work. He picks actors that he knows can fit a mold in a lot of ways too, and that's why we see him continually working with the same people over and over again.
Yeah. So overall, surprisingly, this is my first time seeing it, even though I've seen, like, Wild at Heart, Blue Velvet, Mulholland Drive. I've seen Lost Highway many times. But the other thing is the aspect of try to find a copy in the early 90s. I don't think there was VHS copy was so easily accessible in the days, and where you can find accessibility of those movies very easily. And that's part of the navigating of it. I mean, if you talk people who love, you know, we call them cinephiles, people who love movies, this is the barometer test almost. Have you seen it?
Yeah.
Yeah, and I almost I always say no just because I want to be the outsider. Yeah, no, I haven't seen it, but
deal with it now. You're part of the club.
Yeah, now you're not part of the club unless you go see it. Almost.
Yeah, no, it's true. It's one of those movies that I think that it's almost like of a tier of cinephile, where it's like, you know, you have your like, we consider ourselves movie fans, but you haven't seen The Godfather, like, you know, those kinds of ones.
Yeah,
but then there's like the like
culty,
deeper into that, like
people like
how
the
far
weird
are you
stuff.
willing to go? And I think most of Lynch exists above the realm of The Godfather in terms of like how deep down the rabbit hole are you going to go. Yeah. And this is like, like very, very far in. I'm happy I saw this movie as an adult, to be honest, because had I never, there was no copies of it in my video store. I know for a fact I would have rented it. That image on the front with him and the dreamy starlight it's a horrifying looking image. I would have rented that in a heartbeat. Couldn't find it. So I'm glad I watched it as an adult, because I feel like as a kid I would have hated it. I think my kid sensibilities were much different than who I am now. So, but as it stands, I think it's my favorite David Lynch film.
I do like that lamp. It is the most bizarre lamp because it has the cylinder fluorescence, but then it has an overall bulb. I don't know. He just finds weird stuff to put in his movie. Yeah. And then the stage, and I call it the Cheese Puff Girl that you always see. But
well, I think of this movie, you know, David Lynch as a person, he does just kind of find things that he likes and puts them in. I had a friend of mine who had a quote where he said, like, what is this from Twin Peaks? And he said, I just really like that, so I put it in.
Yeah.
And it's like, you can do that. It adds a flavor to the world. But I also don't think that I think everything in this film, like, there is an intention to quite a number of his elements.
Yeah.
There's just also elements that he thinks that's really neat. I'm going to put that in a movie. So there's like half the stuff in his films is stuff that he thinks gives a style and a flavor, and then he also has that background, like, what does this mean? Who is this?
Well, we always talk about it because I went in for a fine arts degree in college, and he always, you know, my instructors and I always talked about, well, you can give people two answers. Do you want the artsy answer or you want the practical answer?
Yeah.
Well, sometimes he likes to give the artsy answer, and sometimes he just give the practical. Hey, I found it on the street. I thought it was cool. I put it in my movie because I'm an artist. I want a reaction. What the hell?
Well, and I think, you know, I'm rewriting something I've been working on for a while right now, and there was a scene in a coffee shop. So I went to a coffee shop with my wife this last weekend just to get a kind of a feel for the area. And I noticed, like, I was writing down, like, some of those, like, metal signs you see in the coffee shops with the weird phrases and stuff. And I was like, putting this in my story is not going to add anything from a symbolic way, but it builds the world. It builds the world I want to envision. I have a coffee shop in this scene, and I want it to look like a normal coffee shop. David Lynch has a psychotic nightmare fuel, and so he puts things in his movies that are going to give that nightmare fuel.
Coffee shops.
He loves coffee shops, and he also loves playing with the... well, yeah, he likes that too. He likes the Americana, and so we see elements of Americana in Eraserhead. He also really likes playing with technology. He likes that relationship between humans and technology, humans and metal, electricity. There's a lot of electricity throughout his entire work, and this is an electrical movie.
So it's almost like an industrial, urban nightmare.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's hard to go any deeper than that because it is a movie that I think you bring a lot of yourself to.
But also the dance and how I perceive it is the cosmos that was always messing with you, that you can't have a good day. And we talk about uncut gems, which almost feels cosmic at the world, the universe. It starts with the whole universe, and like, what the hell does that have to do with this movie? But it's also showing that sometimes the universe is messing with you. That's the perception.
But I feel like with a movie like Uncut Gems, Adam Sandler's character is causing his own cosmos. You know, he's causing the world to dive back at him. Yeah. Whereas Henry,
it's just gravity going constantly out.
Whereas Henry's kind of like, I'm not going to say he's a good person, but he has
an affair with it.
He's very much like a normal human being, where he has his faults, but he also is trying to not be a bad person. Yeah. Doesn't do a great job.
Where's your wife? I don't know. She probably went to her parents. Well, can I stay here? Okay.
Yeah, getting this bed hot tub thing that I put together.
Right, it was like a hot tub thing, right? I love how David Lynch likes to zoom in on props, just like he does it in Dune. Like, get in there, get that camera in there. Like,
watching him direct is one of the greatest pleasures you will ever have. Is finding those like behind the scenes items where he's just like he's just in his element and he's creating something that's wholly original.
One time, surrealist painter Salvador Dali, somebody one time asked him, why do you put ants in his paintings? And he said, because I hate them. They're disgusting. And somebody's like, well, why do you want to put something that you hate in a movie, in a painting? And his answer was, well, if I put everything I like, that's only half of me. If I put something I don't like, then it's another aspect of me. And I think David Lynch has that aspect. He doesn't really like insects. It's almost like I always think of Salvador Dali. Like,
he reminds me of someone who's fascinated by
him, but is also very cringing on it. And like, right, it's a whole person. Like, you put something that you don't like sometimes, as well as things that you do like. It presents a whole person.
Well, it's kind of like how he mentioned once that like he came across like a dead animal on the side of the road and he was like fascinated with it for a while, and I'm like, yeah, it sounds like something he would do.
Right, just pull over and like, what the heck?
But I've talked to a number, being in the horror realm that I am, I've talked to a number of horror writers who do the same thing I do, which is like when you're trying to write something horrific, you wake up in the morning and you say, what scares the hell out of me? Like, what bothers me? And that's what a lot of my stuff is things that bother you. And I think that's how you do horror cinema. And so that is very much deep with the things that I hate, the things that bother me. And that's my half that goes in there,
Like the theme of the story. It's not the big traumatic events in your life. It's that little hammer on your balls all day that just will not stop. And eventually,
he couldn't film that at the time, though. He couldn't have a giant prosthetic testicle and just
which he probably would. Hey, that's my short film. Just.
I think I'm gonna miss that.
Skip that for screaming off screen. Right?
I'm gonna miss that when that premieres.
All right. So I have to say, if you love movies and you haven't seen Eraserhead,
I think this is one to watch.
You have to see it, yeah.
It's one where even if you hate it, you have to see it. Yeah. Because you will never see another movie like that. Even if you see another David Lynch movie, you will never see another movie like that. The closest approximation I can make to it is Tetsuo the Iron Man, which was influenced by Eraserhead, very much a machine nightmare that was made about 15 years after the fact. But that's maybe the closest approximation, and it's only really half the same movie. It's a unique experience, and I think you don't know if you, for example, things you hate. If you walk out of this movie saying, I hated it, good.
Then you get a reaction out of it, and that's what David Lynch wants.
And that will give you some guidance in how, if you want to continue down the path of David Lynch, because there's films like The Straight Story, which is a very normal movie, and then you get into things that are slightly weirder, like a Twin Peaks, you get into things slightly weirder, like a Mulholland Drive, or like a Blue Velvet in that range, and you get closer and closer to things like Inland Empire, Rabbits, and...
Oh yeah, Inland Empire, like what the heck's going on?
So there's a trajectory that you can do. So if you hate Eraserhead, maybe start at the other end.
Right. Yes. Yeah. So yeah, I thoroughly enjoyed it. I think it's part of his. You know where he's going. It's a start point.
Yep.
And it's like, I love this stuff, and we're gonna have the flickering lights, that are narcotic pacing. Yep. We're gonna have the erotic, weird imagery. Yeah.
So. It's weird, and we've tried our best to explain it for 20 some minutes, and I don't know if we did a
but that's the whole point of the movie, right?
But we've definitely got our feelings out again. I think it's my favorite David Lynch movie. I think,
like I said, how I critique artworks is it's memorable and unforgettable. This is both.
Yep.
It's I will never forget I've seen this movie, and there's some great memorable scenes on it, but there's some things I will never forget. I'll never forget the baby chicken. Yeah. Hemorrhaging for some reason or something like that.
Yeah, good times. I just got an air fryer, so I don't know if that's going to happen if I make a chicken in there. But
hesitate to go to your girlfriend's house when they're having chicken.
There you go.
What? Okay.
There's a lesson. That's the most personal element of David Lynch. We finally discovered it. Avoid the chicken. But thank you guys for joining us, and let us know down below your thoughts on Eraserhead, your thoughts on David Lynch.
You should have some.
And your thoughts on maybe he should do a follow up. Maybe do Eraserhead 2 where we follow the next generation of Eraserheads. Let us know down below your thoughts on the film, and while you're down there, please check out that Patreon as well. You can sacrifice one cup of coffee every single month to join the Patreon, and then you get on our rotation of picks that we get to do. You get access to Picks with Kyle and Nick, our monthly show where we give you recommendations on our favorite filmmakers, our favorite kinds of movies, and then you also get a say in the episodes that we do on the show. Yeah. So thank you guys for joining us, and you can find all my film reviews at goatfilmreviews.com.
You can find my podcast, the St. Paul Filmcast, where I interview local filmmakers of the Twin Cities area, anywhere you find podcasts.
All right. Play us off, Static.